Hello, everyone. Today we'd be discussing a couple of questions from paper 4 that we had in March 2025. Now, we'd initially start off with reading out the questions, and then I'd want to discuss a couple of possible answers that we could have written if we were the ones who were sitting for this paper. Now, for paper 4, I'm sure you all do have an idea. You initially in section A, I mean, section A is compulsory, you do not have any choice. So the two options or the two components that you've studied for while preparing for your A2 psychology syllabus, amongst uh, clinical psychology, we had consumer psychology, we have health psychology, and we have organizational psychology. So the two options or the two components that you've studied, you need to attempt questions from those two sections, and then you need to attempt all questions from those two sections. That means the two sections that you've studied, you do not get any choice in section A for paper 4, just like you have no choice in paper 3 at all. But for paper 3 you don't have any choice at all through and through. However, for paper 4 you do get a choice in section B, but there's no choice for section A. Just bear this in your mind. Now, when we and as we speak about this particular paper, like I said, that we had in March 2025, this paper over here reads, I mean, if I have a look at this, section A, answer questions from the two options in this section. This is the first option that we have, the first component that we have, which is clinical psychology. Answer all questions if you have studied this particular option. So the examiner, even the examiner is trying to ensure that you do not get derailed and start reading questions from an option that you haven't studied. Remember, time is precious. Those 90 minutes that you spend in the examination hall, they're very precious. So before I even get started with this, if I may remind you, in the questions that we had discussed, I believe yesterday, in the questions that we had discussed for from paper 3, the four questions from clinical psychology, let me remind you, the first question was from OCD, that is obsessive compulsive disorder. I'm talking about paper 3 over here, whereas this is paper 4. Do not get confused. So for paper 3, you had the first question from the unit obsessive compulsive disorder. You had the second question from the unit anxiety and fear related disorders. So was the case with question number 3. This question was also from anxiety and fear related disorders. And the fourth question was from the unit schizophrenia. Now, for clinical psychology, you all know there are five units or five chapters, just like you have five different chapters or five different units from any component that you study. So the point that I'm trying to make over here is the questions that you had in paper 3 from the units, like this is OCD, the first one, obsessive compulsive disorder, the second and third question from anxiety and fear related disorders, and the fourth question from the unit schizophrenia, right? Whereas if I talk about paper 4, over here, this first question is from the study by Orrick et al. And you should know this is from mood affective disorders. And the second question is from impulse control disorders. Impulse control disorders. Now, nothing official here, but the ones who know, they know. For the ones who understand, they do understand that the units that have been tested in, or the chapters that have been tested in paper 3 have not been tested in paper 4. Again, let me reiterate, nothing official. Now, having said that, we know by now, I just removed this paper 3 question so that there's no confusion ahead. So we have two questions, and these two questions, if I may have a look at them, the first question turns out to be of 10 marks, and the second question turns out to be of 8 marks. Now, the first component that you've studied is clinical psychology, and the second component that I teach is health psychology. So on one end, you have 18 marks from clinical psychology to attempt, and on the other end you have 18 marks from health psychology. 18 and 18 together makes it 36 marks. So 36 marks out of 60 are section A, and section B has planning a study question, which would be, the entire question would be of 24 marks. And this is where you get a choice in section B. I repeat, you get a choice in section B, not in section A. So if you get a choice in section B, the two components that you've studied from, you're expected to read through the question from clinical psychology and read through the entire question from health psychology, and then choose what question you're more comfortable with in attempting while attempting. So we talk about that later in another lesson, but for now today I want to focus on section A, clinical psychology, paper 4, February March 2025. Now to begin with, if we read the first question here from the study by Orrick et al. 1997 on mood affective disorders. Orrick et al., like I said, is from the unit mood affective disorders, or the question over here says it too. This is a key study, and for a key study or from a key study, you're expected to know it all. You're expected to know every tiny, toony detail, every nitty gritty. There's nothing trivial when you talk about a key study. You need to know it all. And if you want a particular list on what all does the examiner expect of you to know from a particular key study, it's available on the syllabus. Just open Google, type down A-level psychology 9990 2025 syllabus. You'd come across the syllabus. Just click on search, write down key studies, and you'd exactly find out what the examiner expects of you. Now, having said that, if I move on from the key study by Orrick et al. On mood or affective disorders, the first question, outline the sample of participants in the study. So yes, you need to know the sample. This turns out to be a 4-mark question, very easy, 4 characteristics of from a particular sample, and you get your marks. Uh, if I would have been a student and if I would have been able to remember more than 4 features, I would have done that, because remember in CIs, there's uh, no negative marking. So I would have always wanted to keep myself safe. Now, question 1, part B. This reads, suggest one reason why a control group of participants was used in the study. So you need to know the study well to know that there was a control group, so that you're able to provide reasoning that if this control group was used, because it was used, why is it that this control group was used? The third question over here reads, explain 2 strengths of the sample used in the study other than the use of control group. So the control group is already a sample. You cannot just say, oh, there was a control group that would help us with comparisons. So besides the control group being a strength, being a plus point for this particular study, from the sample of this particular study, there are 2 other strengths that you need to know, and you need to be able to explain them, because this question is worth 4 marks. So this is question 1. And if I talk about question number 2 here, question number 2 reads, state 2 diagnostic criteria of gambling disorder. Gambling disorder, we all know, is from the unit impulse control disorders. Number 2, suggest one way in which gambling disorder could be measured other than by self-report. So when you talk about a self-report measure, you have interviews, you have questionnaires. So at this point, this might be a tricky one. The first thing that comes in your mind is observation. But remember, the examiner wants you to suggest one way in which gambling disorder could be measured, but it has to be ethical. The word must is in bold over here. I mean, even if it wasn't in bold, if the examiner has said something, you might as well. I mean, you're supposed to follow that. 2C, the third part, explain 2 weaknesses of using self-report to measure gambling disorder. Now, that was enough of reading with the questions. Let's quickly hop on to the possible answers. These answers, I feel, could help you get top band marks. And uh, of course, you can, if you have something of more for the questions that ask you to suggest any suggestion that is appropriate, that is contextualized, that does make sense and has psychological terminologies in it, he gets you marks. As simple as that. So from the study by Orrick et al. On mood or affective disorders, outline the sample of participants used in the study. Outlining the sample, I've already put this in bold so that it's easier for you. The sample consisted of 42 unrelated patients with bipolar disorder type 1. They were recruited from 2 Croatian hospitals. The sample included 25 females and 17 males, aged 31 and 70. Fourth characteristic, 1, 2, 3, 4. 16 of the bipolar participants had a first degree relative. Fifth, diagnosed with major affective disorders confirmed via medical records. A control group of 40 participants with no personal or family psychiatric history was also used. The study employed a match pair design, matching control groups to patients based on age and sex. So there are a lot of characteristics that I've mentioned. I had a reason because once you read this, this would help you learn it, which might end up being handy when it comes to preparing for your examination. But yeah, if it's a 4 mark question, they're asking you to outline the sample of participants. Any 4 to 5 features, 4 to 5 at max 6 features would be a safe way to attempt this particular question. How do I feel marks have been awarded here? For the marks, I believe the marks could be awarded for accurate participant number, the gender split, the diagnosis, matching control use, anything. So that being there, if we move on towards the second part of question number 1. So the first part was of 4 marks. The second part is of 2 marks. Suggest one reason. One I remember was in bold. Suggest one reason why a control group of participants was used in this study. A control group was used to compare the presence of genetic polymorphism. Remember, if you have studied, I mean, you should have, you should, or I'd like to assume that you've already covered your syllabus well by now. If you talk about the study by Orrick et al., you know that there was this experimental group and then there was this control group. So they're asking us about the reasons as to why a control group was used. A control group was used to compare the presence of genetic polymorphism in people with bipolar disorder and those without it. This allows, now you trying to show the examiner, you know, an advantage, a strength of using a control group, and you're smart enough to contextualize it, smart enough to link it or write it in a manner that the examiner knows you're referring to the particular study that was conducted by Orrick et al. Now, this allows researchers to determine whether the specific genes being investigated are genuinely associated with bipolar disorder or if they're equally common in the general population. So that's you usually use a control group for the sake of comparisons. So what you did is you showed the examiner that I know why it is used and I exactly know why a control group was used in this particular study. Now, this was question number 1B. Moving on real quick to question number 1C. If we speak about this question, explain 2 strengths of the sample used in the study other than the use of control group. Easy peasy. Now I've written the answer to the possible answer, indicative answer over here in points. It's on your discretion. I mean, in an examination, I would have written it in the form of a paragraph, but it is totally okay. It's totally fine and perfect, even if you're writing it in points in your CIE examination. So the first, explain 2 strengths of the sample used in the study other than the usage of a control group. Number 1, gender diversity. We all do know there were males and there were females, both. So the sample included both males and females, which allows researchers to explore gender differences in genetic influences. For example, the study found that polymorphisms were more common in females, suggesting gender specific genetic risks. See, you need to fight for your marks. You cannot just end up writing, oh, there were males and females that were there. I know that's correct, but remember, you're trying to not lose marks. You're trying to make a point. You're trying to ensure that the examiner gives you full marks over here. Give it a try, give it a shot. Don't just attempt your paper for the sake of attempting it. You need to be in your right state of mind. You need to recall, right? And that is exactly why I discourage students from pulling an all-nighter right before the paper, because it doesn't really help you. It gives you that false sense of satisfaction. Oh, I've covered it all. But remember, it's not only about covering it. The next day, you need to be able to recall the entire, your memory needs to be working the way it should be working. For that, you need to rest. And a tired brain, like I say, has never helped anyone. A tired brain has never, an exhausted brain has never helped out anyone. So, whatever the time your paper is, make a point that at least 2 days before that, you are not, I mean, I don't know how your daily routine is like, but if you're someone who sleeps during the day and studies during the night, make sure you're fixing it at least 2 days before you go and sit for examination, because you need to train your body that your muscle memory, your brain should be active and charged and ready to help you when you need its help the most and at that particular time of the day. So here, let's not get derailed. The first point over here is gender diversity. The sample included both males and females, which allows research. I think I'm redoing this, which allows researchers to explore gender differences in genetic influences. For example, the study found that polymorphisms were more common in females, suggesting gender specific genetic risks. One. Number two, the second strength, use of real patients. The sample included individuals who were clinically diagnosed with bipolar disorder and had medical records confirming family history, increasing the ecological validity of the findings as they reflect real world clinical populations. How is it that I feel you'd get marks over here? So you'd get, let me just remove this part. Yeah. So I feel you'd get for each strength, you have number one, identified a strength, you've explained it, and you've explained it specifically referring to the study, right? So this is how I think this is a checklist that I think you should carry with you when you're going sitting for your examination. This is what you need to do to be able to score full marks and not throw away marks unnecessarily. Now, this was question number one. Let's move on towards question number two that we had from impulse control disorders. So, state two diagnostic criteria of gambling disorder. Two diagnostic criteria from gambling disorder. Now, the answers that you see written over here, they are indicative content. You do not necessarily have to write the same answers in the same manner. This is just to show you how, this is just to guide you, maybe facilitate you a bit, and that's it. So yeah, after 20, I mean, pre-2024, the CI used to refer to the DSM. However, from 2024 onwards, the CI has switched now to ICD. And hence, when we talk about the diagnostic criteria over here, we should be referring to ICD. Number one, state two diagnostic criteria of gambling disorder. The first one, impaired control over gambling behavior, such as amount of time or amount of money that you spend. One. Number two, gambling continues despite negative consequences, such as you're harming your profession, your career, your family, you're making your family unhappy, your relationships with your friends, your colleagues, your neighbors, the people around you, the people who close to you might not remain the same. So, one, the first point, impaired control. The second point, gambling, continuing to gamble even despite of the fact that there are negative consequences to it. So I feel this is something that could help you get full marks. Moving on to the second question. Now, this entire question number two, remember, is of 8 marks, right? So we initially had a 2-mark question, and then we have a 2-mark question again, followed by a 4-mark question. Now, this is the question that I really liked when I read. Suggest one way. Remember, the keyword, the command word over here is suggest. My response, I'm re-saying this, I'm saying this over and over again. My response could be very different from your response. Your response could definitely be better than my response, right? So this is just to tell you this is one way through which you could have answered this question. Suggest one way in which gambling disorder could be measured other than by self-report. Your answer must be ethical. So typically we use questionnaires, typically we use interviews, and guess what? They're both examples of a self-report measure, and the examiner has very clearly specified that we shouldn't be using a self-report measure. And the next best alternative that usually comes in our mind is observing someone, right? So an observation is a possibility, but I chose this one. An ethical method could be using behavioral tracking in virtual simulations. Behavioral tracking in virtual simulations, you could take informed consent, of course, if there's someone who is uh, come to you as a client and as a patient and wants to be helped with dealing with the gambling disorder, they might as well give you consent too. So an ethical method could be using behavioral tracking in a virtual simulation with prior informed consent taken from the client. Now, this is when I explain what I meant here. For example, participants could play a gambling simulation on a computer while the software records objective data such as the time spent playing. I'd use another color. You're collecting objective data and then you're exemplifying how, such as the time spent playing, the amount that you've spent there, and the response to wins or losses. This method avoids distress and deception because you've taken prior consent. This method avoids distress and deception while providing measurable behavioral indicators of gambling disorder. So this is one way you could do this. I'm sure you could think of a better way to do this as well. But if nothing clicks, this works. Moving on. How do we get marks here? You get the first mark for stating the way, this was the way. And the second mark for explaining how it's ethical and appropriate according to this particular situation. Now, taking this ahead, explain two weaknesses of using self-report measure. Super easy. Self-report to measure gambling disorder. Now, many students, I feel, might get carried away. They're like, oh, we know this, we know two and many more weaknesses of a self-report measure, but whatever the answer is that you're planning on writing has to be aligned with or has to be in line with measuring gambling disorder. What are the two weaknesses? What are the two cons? What are the two disadvantages? What are the two problems that you might face when you're wanting to use a self-report measure to be able to measure gambling disorder? Do not forget on the keyword, the command word. The command word over here is explain, and this happens to be a 4-mark question. So the first point over here could be social desirability, like I had mentioned earlier. I've put this over here in points. It's on your discretion. You want to write it down in a paragraph, well and good. So they both work. You can write it down in two different paragraphs. I mean, this would turn into a paragraph as well. You just have to rephrase it. So the first one, social desirability bias. Individuals may underreport how often they gamble. Social desirability. You all know what social desirability is. You're through with AS. And social desirability, when you act in a manner that it leaves a good impression of who you are. Individuals may underreport how often they gamble or how much they lose due to embarrassment or fear of judgment, which lowers the validity of the data. This, I believe, is good enough to help you gain 2 marks. The second one, memory recall issues or retrospectivity issues. People may struggle to remember exactly how often or how long they've gambled, especially if the behavior is frequent, leading to inaccurate responses and further, consequently, unreliable findings. Now, this could be the second uh, point which is a disadvantage when it comes to you wanting to use a self-report measure to be able to measure gambling disorder. How is it that I feel you would get decent marks on this one? You get, for each point, since you've been asked to explain 2 points, for each point that you've included, that you've identified, there's an explanation and there's a relevance to gambling disorder assessment. So keep this in mind, and hopefully, inshallah, you would not go wrong. I hope this has been helpful. Thank you.